Welcome to AEye Insights, where we talk trends with proven industry leaders. My name is Jim Robnett. With me today is Elliot Garbus. Elliot is a advisory board member for AEye and former VP and General Manager of the Transportation Solutions Division at Intel. Elliot, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us. It might be helpful for people to understand a little bit about your background. I think you've got a really interesting history with Intel, and maybe you could share some of the interesting things you've done and, give us a little snapshot of what you've been working on in your past.
Well, maybe just to be brief so we can really get on to the meat of the discussion. I spent almost 30 years at Intel. My last role as the VP and General Manager of the Transportation Solutions Division, I got really an up-close view of some of the transitions that the automotive industry is really wrestling with. You've got an industry where the major players are about 100 years old, and that's really a stunning accomplishment for any company to have survived for 100 years. And now they're facing a number of really rather dramatic transitions, the shift to electric propulsion systems, and the rise of both active safety and ultimately autonomous vehicles, all of which are really tremendously disruptive and require a tremendous amount of agility.
Perfect. That sets up things very well for us. Let me start with an easy question for you. I think you and I are about the same age. We grew up in probably similar circumstances. We were promised jetpacks and self-driving cars. So, Elliot, which are you going to own first, the jetpack or the self-driving car?
Well, I think I probably won't have a jetpack, and I probably won't own a self-driving car,
Right.
But I'll be happy to ride in them.
Perfect. Awesome. So Elliot, let's start with just a snapshot. Give us your view of, let's focus on autonomy, because that's what we're really here to talk about. Obviously, electrification and connectivity and shared ownership, to your point, is all a part of that. But tell us how you see the autonomous vehicle industry from a broad view, and then we can kind of get into some of the technical issues that we're facing as an industry, and maybe some of the social and legal issues and other issues that we're facing as an industry.
Sure. So as I talk about autonomy, I'm going to focus first on level 4, right? The driverless vehicle, just so there's no ambiguity. And in many ways, I think this has the opportunity to really be the most disruptive. I mean, first, if we think about cost, today, if you were to take a taxi, costs about, if you could find a taxi, it costs about $6 a passenger mile. If you take a ride share, it's about $2.25 a passenger mile. You drive yourself, it's about $1, $1.75. And it's expected, or Bloomberg estimated, by 2025, the cost of riding in a fully autonomous vehicle, a driverless taxi, would be 35 cents a passenger mile. Now, today, mass transit is 30 cents a passenger mile. So you're talking about the convenience of point-to-point transportation at a cost that approaches mass transit. And I've spoken with some auto executives who've actually been firmly convinced that they will get their operating costs below 35 cents a mile. So these are levels that really set up fundamental and dramatic industry level disruption.
Absolutely, absolutely. But if we go back 2 or 3 years or 4 years ago, what we heard from a lot of those industry executives was we were going to have those vehicles on the road today. What's holding us back right now?
I think a lot of it really is concerns about technology readiness, right? I think most of those companies were making announcements around 2021, and they were being aggressive, right? They were setting tough to reach goals to inspire their teams to deliver. I think in many ways, there's a tremendous amount of unknowns here. We do see some rather remarkable milestones in this space, right? Waymo was announced here in the suburbs of Phoenix that they are now operating their autonomous vehicles without safety drivers. And they've opened up their platform for any user to join within their geofenced region. Aptiv has got a JV with Hyundai Motional that is partnered with Lyft, and they got permits in Las Vegas to operate the vehicles without safety drivers. So we're seeing the very early phases of this transition. And I think there are a couple of things that are important to recognize. You know, one, you do have a tremendous amount of technology, and responsible companies want to make sure that they are delivering better than human levels of safety as they roll these technologies out. And so, you know, I certainly applaud that thinking and direction. But the other issue is there are a whole set of customer experience issues that need to be addressed when you've got a driverless vehicle that are not always obvious. You know, just a couple of silly examples. If you're in a fully autonomous vehicle and a passenger leaves the door open, you know, is the vehicle disabled? It's not like a driver can pop out and close the door, right? So it changes the requirements about the kind of vehicle. Waymo in their pilots has discovered it's very important that they have the ability to wake up passengers because people fall asleep in the vehicles all the time.
Right.
So I think learning how people want to use the technology, what they need to get comfortable with it, how you build trust between a passenger and a robotic vehicle. There's still things to learn and work out before you can roll a business out at scale.
That's awesome. So let's start with some of the technical issues. If we think about a fully autonomous level 4 driving stack, right? We start with perception, or we start with sensing, we get to perception, we get to, you know, drivable area, and then, you know, path planning, and then the robotic driver. Maybe that's a way to look at this stack. Just from a purely technical perspective, to deliver that safe driving experience, where should we be spending our time, and where's kind of the value being created in terms of that experience, delivering that experience?
Well, you know, I think there's still a lot of innovation going on really at almost every level of the stack. We see millimeter wave radar, increasing levels of accuracy. Certainly what AI has been doing in the combination of LiDAR and camera has opened up, you know, innovative uses of LiDAR with much greater levels of efficiency. I think these are all, you know, remarkable, and cameras continue to get better dynamic range, better color fidelity, all nice improvements in kind of the sensing modalities. As we talk about perception, there's certainly been a lot of enthusiasm around deep learning. Deep learning leverages neural networks. It is a relatively new technology, having really emerged, I think, around 2012, 2013, and initially used for image recognition, or computer vision, which is the role it's playing in vehicles. And we see a lot of work going on in the semiconductor industry to improve the performance and performance per watt of the technologies that deliver on deep learning. But I think really for getting us there on autonomous driving, these technology improvements I've just described are all nice, but they're not necessarily necessary to get us there. That those modalities are sufficient today. The improvements are certainly welcomed. I think the challenge is capturing enough of the odd corner cases that humans run into driving that you need to be able to train a computer on. And because those corner cases tend to be rare, it requires a lot of time to capture them.
Perfect. No, that's great. So one of the things that I've seen is, right, as we solve these technical challenges, the business challenges and maybe the social legal challenges need to be solved along with that. And you talked about how companies view, their cost targets and their maybe even their revenue targets in the future. From a business standpoint, what do you see, in terms of maybe emerging partnerships or emerging business models? What's changing on the business side along with the technology as we move these things forward?
I think there are a number of things and a number of industries are going to be significantly impacted. It's estimated that once we get to really wide deployment of fully autonomous vehicles, the average American family will save $5,000 a year, right? You won't have auto insurance to pay for. You won't be buying cars or making car payments. That's really a stunning, stunning amount of savings. There's going to be a tremendous reduction in injuries and the loss of life, right? Today, globally, we see about 1.3 million people a year dying in traffic collisions. In the US, it's about 40,000 people a year, right? That's a shocking number, right? 40,000 a year is like a 737 falling out of the sky every weekday. So, having those numbers go from $40,000 to zero, 40,000 people to zero, that's remarkable. That's something to aspire to. And then globally, in the US, there's an additional 50 million people who are injured. And again, we have a real opportunity to create some strong benefits for society.
Yeah.
But from a business perspective, I think one of the things that's most fascinating is who is actually going to pay for the ride, right? You've got an opportunity now, particularly as that cost of transportation comes down, to find someone else to pay for the ride. You make a dinner reservation with your wife and the restaurant decides they're going to throw in transportation, and maybe you'll decide to buy an extra cocktail or bottle of wine and they would have ended up ahead. Or, you're going to Target or Whole Foods and the retailer will pay for the trip. So a lot of very interesting things that are going to happen. And these kinds of partnerships and ability to build an ecosystem of people who are willing to pay for a trip and match them up with passengers is going to be a critical piece of the business.
That's really interesting. And I think, like you said, really disruptive, and, there's opportunity and challenge on that side, right? For the people who don't move fast enough and don't adapt, there's the real risk of being left behind here. And I think that fear and opportunity is some of the dynamics that we're seeing across all our customers, right?
Certainly, it's was very interesting as I was out visiting with OEMs, I don't know, quite a few years ago now, but it was probably around 2016. We actually saw all of the OEMs make a rather dramatic shift in their thinking. And some of the fear you mentioned was looming large.
Right.
I had one of the world's largest OEMs express concern that they could become Kodak, right? A huge, enormous, very well-known, almost a beloved brand that the transition to digital photography pretty much took out. And that these trends in autonomous driving could, really destroy a lot of the auto industry as we know it. It was also an observation by another very large automaker that Google could buy any car company they wanted, and there was not a car company that could consider buying Google, right? Which had one automaker say to me, we don't want to become a Google subsidiary.
Yeah, it's
right?
pretty amazing for some of us old guys to be in that new reality. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and it's, I think, again, inside a company that's 100 years old, where the structures have really been hyper optimized for cost. I mean, let's face it, automobiles are extraordinarily complex consumer products that are heavily regulated and delivered with, I mean, extraordinary levels of quality. I mean, it is really, really a remarkable achievement. And these 100-year-old companies are highly optimized to deliver these high quality, products in a cost effective way. And suddenly having to wrestle with all of these transformations is really challenging. And you can see how different companies have addressed it. It's fascinating to see General Motors, for example. They acquire a small company called Cruise. They put longtime GM executives in charge. They staff it up. They place an enormous bet on autonomous driving. Delphi, tier one supplier of historic standing, splits the company in two, and creates Aptiv to focus on active safety and autonomous driving. That they end up in a JV with Hyundai. And again, remarkable changes in the industry. And I think this is really all about, as you rightly said, balancing the opportunity and the fear.
Right, right. Okay, we've talked a little bit about kind of the history and where we are now. Do me a favor and pull out your crystal ball and think about, tell us where we're going to be 5 to 7 years from now. We've got this kind of discrete world of mobility and this discrete world of ADAS or traditional automotive. I think we might agree that those are converging in a way, but what's the day in the life going to look like for transportation 5 or 7 years from now?
Well, let's talk a little bit about the near term, because I think in many ways we've passed that by.
Sure.
So I think there are a set of remarkable things going on today as the automakers largely have embraced active safety. In particular, I think Toyota's demonstrated remarkable leadership with their Toyota Safety Sense, where they're integrating forward-facing cameras and a very cost-effective suite of simple ADAS features from the lowest end vehicles up to their highest end vehicles. I think that's just remarkable. And the opportunity, again, for these technologies to really reduce injuries and save lives, we're going to see a greater and greater embrace of those. We're beginning to see the adoption of level 3 technologies. And I like to refer to these as scenario-based driving assistance. So we see General Motors has done some remarkable things with their Super Cruise, right? And certainly Tesla's done some remarkable things in this space as well. We're going to see more of this, where automakers roll out features where the vehicle can drive itself on the highway, or the vehicle has a traffic jam assist. And if you're in bumper to bumper traffic, you can just set the car to operate itself. There are some automakers that at least at one time have called out some of the problems with level 3 automation. And SAE level 3 automation requires that the driver stay in the loop, be ready to take over control of the vehicle. Ford announced some years ago that they were very concerned because they couldn't seem to keep their engineers engaged to take over the vehicle when the vehicle wanted to, needed a driver to intercede. And so I think we'll see more and more of that sort of scenario-based driving come in, more and more active safety come in. But the approach you need to take and the business model between active safety and full autonomy is huge. And when you move to a driverless vehicle, it really makes economic sense, as I called out earlier, for that to be a service, transportation as a service. And that brings on a complete and disruptive change in business model. So I think, in the near term, we'll continue to see continued enhancements and embrace around active safety, making our vehicles safer. And then, as we look out a little further in time, we'll really move to fully autonomous vehicles that will embody a much different business model. I spoke with one of the leaders in ride sharing some time ago. And they said, if they could get a vehicle that costs $300,000 and had a lifetime of only 2 or 3 years, they could make the business model work, because they'd have a vehicle that's, operating 80, 90% of the time. Whereas today, we buy a vehicle and we operate it at best 4% of the time. Some people joke we buy cars for the right to park them. And it's one thing to think in a very US-centric way. If we think globally, the UN has estimated that by 2030, 2/3 of the world will be living in cities of 10 million or more people. And in those mega cities, you have horrible problems with air pollution, with traffic, and with parking. And while we've talked about some of the disruption in transportation, if you think about cities for a minute, about 30% of the real estate in cities is used for parking. And so there's an opportunity to free that real estate up for much more effective uses. And I think globally, we're at the beginning of what's going to be a really remarkable transformation that certainly in 5 to 7 years, I'd expect we'd see broadly deployed.
Perfect. It's an incredible time. It's an exciting time. In a lot of ways, this is our industry's moonshot, and it's fun and pretty amazing to be a part of. So, Elliot, thank you for joining us. Really appreciated your insights. You're a great asset to AEye as one of our key advisors, so we appreciate your time as always. So thank you everybody for joining us for the first edition of AEye Insights, and we will see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Jim, and stay healthy.